So good to see so many of you here today. Guess who also has a cold today, like many of you? Thank you for getting out on a chilly morning. It's interesting, I looked at the weather forecast for Ukraine, and the current temperature is actually colder in Tuscumbia than in Kyiv, Ukraine this morning, also in Kramatorsk, Ukraine. Please continue to pray for our brethren over there. They continue to press on in spite of some unique challenges. Please also pray for Jenna and myself. We'll be leaving Tuesday morning to go over to Ukraine for a few days. It'll be a quick trip. We'll have our annual winter retreat over there. It'll be quicker than usual for me, in part because Jenna gets to go with me. First time she's been over in Ukraine in the winter, so I'm looking forward to being with her and having a good time. Some of our finer servants will be preaching here next Sunday morning, and I wish that I could be here to hear these guys speak. Thad Lucer will be speaking next Sunday morning, and then Eli Harper will be preaching next Sunday night. And these are great servants of God, and I know that you're going to be blessed by their messages. I know you're blessed by their lives and all the serving and the extra miles that they do for us and for the Lord's church here at Tuscumbia. I don't know how you do when you take medicine, but when I take medicine, I have unusual dreams, and I just want you to know, not only do I have unusual dreams, sometimes I say things that don't make much sense to me. So if you hear something this morning that doesn't make a lot of sense to you, then just bear with me. I'll try as best I can to speak where the Bible speaks, remain silent where the Bible is silent. But I knew when I was sleeping last night that I might have a little bit of an issue in the lesson this morning because of one of the dreams I had. You may know that there's a ball game tomorrow night, and one of our favorite teams, some of us, a favorite team is playing in this game, and I've been pretty confident going into this game thinking that my team would be victorious. But I had a dream last night, and the the offensive line for my particular team, one of the guys starting for the University of Alabama in my dream last night was Wesley Campbell. Yes, sir. Wesley's sitting up front. I think there's a reason for that. If that doesn't make you nervous about the game tomorrow, and he's wearing sandals. He's wearing sandals. So my man was ready to play some ball last night. So yesterday I was over at the Well Care Center exercise place. I've been trying to go over there a little bit and just try to be a little bit healthier, try to be a good example for my friends in this congregation, and it's interesting. I go and Brother Walker Kirkland is there a lot of times, and a lot of good, vibrant, healthy members of this church I run into. And yesterday morning I was on a treadmill, and I was just doing the best I could, thinking I'm doing all right. And there's this really old gentleman on a treadmill right beside me. And that's not a time where you want to do a whole lot of talking and all, but this was a chatty guy. He was real talkative, and I was almost out of breath as he was trucking along and doing fine, and he asked me this question. I've never been asked before. He said, "Have you had a bypass yet? Like a heart bypass?" And I'm thinking, do I look that bad? I mean, I'm thinking I look like Tarzan compared to this old guy. He's asking me about so, you know what the effect of that question was? I perked up. I went twice as far. I wasn't going to let that old man outdo me. What makes you go faster? What makes you run this race with more enthusiasm? Even more dedication than previously. Maybe it's a comment that someone would say. Maybe it's something that would happen in your life, one of these unexpected, life-changing events. But sometimes we do need a comment. Sometimes we do need a sermon. Sometimes we do need a happening in our lives that maybe almost offends us or provokes us or startles us or challenges us to press on and maybe even to pick up the pace. I think it's a pretty good question to think about. Where are we going to be 5 days from now if we continue at the same pace we're on now? same direction. Where are we going to be 5 months from now? Where are we going to be 5 years from now? Where are we going to be in eternity if we continue in the direction and the pace that we are presently on? Where are we going with all this? Are we building momentum? Are we increasing in our spiritual strength? Are we developing more power as we are we getting weaker and we're losing some steam, we're losing some momentum, and frankly speaking, if we continue in this direction, we won't be continuing much longer in this direction. We're going to quit. This is, as you know, still the beginning of a new year, 2017. It's still shocking to me that we're already at 2017. This can be, and in many respects this ought to be, one of the best years of our lives. And I'm not necessarily thinking about with our health or with our money situation or maybe even some of our relationships with people not God. But this can be our best year spiritually. This can be a year of dynamic growth and progress. And really, there's some preachers and some churches, I kind of like this. They go into various years with themes, and they want to emphasize this every Sunday, every day in devotionals and Bible readings and lessons and so on. And that's not a bad idea. Not last year, but the year before. Remember, every Sunday morning we study something of the life of Christ. But if we're thinking about what we need to be about and the direction and what ought to be an obsession for us, a noble, good obsession for us, seems like growing in the image of God ought to be really high on the list of what we want to be and what we want to do. Growing in knowledge, growing in spiritual strength, growing in maturity, growing in wisdom. I've repeated this a time or two earlier. You may remember Old Testament theme seems to have been, let my people go. New Testament, let my people grow. God wants us to grow. Jesus wants us to grow. Our shepherds of this flock want us to grow. We want to grow. We want to keep advancing the ball. We want to keep getting stronger. We want to keep getting more mature. We want to become an even greater ambassador for our Lord. When I read the Gospel of John, I see there some people that want to grow. But then a series of events occurs. They hear some things that causes them to lose their enthusiasm for the trek. And they actually do the worst thing anybody could ever do. Follow Jesus and then stop following Jesus. In John chapter 2, you may remember this. We have Christ's first miracle. He's at a wedding feast in Cana of Galilee. He turns water into wine. And when he does this, you remember, that causes lots of people to be drawn to him. Lots of people to want to follow him. And that continues on in that direction. He goes to another area and performs some more miracles, and more people come after him. Same thing goes on to Jerusalem. More miracles, more people coming after him. He goes in John chapter 4 to this place, Judea, does some more miracles, and actually he gets at this point more disciples, more followers than even John the Baptist had. John the Baptist has been at this for a while, and a lot of people coming after him. Then remember, he goes to Samaria, encounters this woman at a well, gives her a fresh start. She goes and tells her neighbors about Christ, the Messiah, and they go meet Jesus, and he develops even more and more followers. John chapter 5, Jesus again doing more miracles, getting more and more followers. And life now is almost impossible for him. He can't go anywhere without people just overwhelming him with their words and their needs. John chapter 6, he crosses over, you remember this, crosses over the Sea of Galilee, and he's got so many people around him. You remember what he does? He heads for the mountains. I'll climb up higher and get away from these people. Well, These people pretty determined, and they follow him up the mountaintop. And the crowd is big. Their appetite, their hunger is big, and they don't have food, so Jesus gets a lunch from a little boy. He's got, 2 brim and 5 biscuits, and he turns that into an all-you-can-eat seafood buffet. And he's just got so many people coming after him. Later, he walks on the water. And his popularity at this point in his ministry is at its absolute height. Then you get in deeper to John chapter 6. And Jesus starts talking to these people. And there are 5,000 men, not counting women and children. So 15,000 people on this hillside listening to Christ. And he starts talking to them about difficult things, challenging things. He talks to them about himself and how he is bread and he is their spiritual source of nutrition. And if they want to be his disciple, they got to do something. And the something they got to do is to consume Christ. They got to eat him as their spiritual bread, as their spiritual nourishment. And when they start hearing words like that, they're confused, they're disappointed, and some of them actually decide to walk away. This is John chapter 6, verse 60. Trying to get them to understand he's bread of life. Therefore, many of his disciples, when they heard this, said, "This is a hard saying. Who can understand it?" And they didn't understand it. And then we have a few verses later, one of the saddest passages in our Bible, verse 66. From that time, many of his disciples went back and walked with him no more. How'd that work out? The practicalities of it. Have you ever thought about it? In the morning, there are thousands and thousands following Jesus. They hear something difficult. And then by lunchtime, perhaps there are just hundreds left. And then by supper time, only a dozen. Maybe it didn't happen all in one day. Maybe it was over a series of days where Jesus would get up and kind of do a head count. And there are thousands, and then there's hundreds, and then ultimately after a few days there's just 12. That was so discouraging to Jesus that after there's just 12 left, he turns to them and says, "Will you also go away? You going to quit on me also? You leaving? You bailing?" Love Peter's attitude. Peter answered him, this is 68, "Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life. We have come to believe and know that you are the Christ, the Son of the living God." Good answer. Maybe the best answer to any question ever. And those that did stick, and those that did stay, and bear in mind, of the 12 that remained at this point, one of them thought Jesus wasn't worth even more than 30 pieces of silver. One who just gave the great answer would later be denying him. So these that were staying, at times, even their conviction wavered some. You remember hearing something of this coach, Bear Bryant, and years ago, he was coaching at Texas A&M, and he was a very hard coach. He I think later in life regretted how firm he was, how maybe even vicious he was with some people, with some of his players. And he took 3 bus loads of his players out to a place called Junction, a very difficult, a very hard, a very hot, a very dry place, and he worked those boys in those practices so hard. 3 buses carried the team out there, but there was daily attrition, and then only 1 bus at the end of all that brought the team home. But those that were on the 1 bus, those that stuck, they ultimately won the ring. They won the prize. Those that stick with Jesus through all the hard sayings, through all the challenges of following Christ, win the prize, win the ring. hear the words, "Well done, good and faithful servant, enter into the joys of the Lord." Why did these disciples leave? We know about the hard saying, but beyond that, what was in their mind? These thousands of people who followed him, who saw the miracles, who ate the bread, why did they quit on Christ? Perhaps some of them saw him as a loser. And we like to be with winners. Losers, as we know, don't have the ability to walk on water. Losers can't raise the dead. Losers can't take 2 fish and 5 loaves and turn it into a feast for all. Losers cannot be resurrected themselves from the grave. They can't ascend to the Father. They can't heal diseases. They can't turn water into wine. Losers can't do those kinds of things. Jesus does those kinds of things. Jesus isn't the loser here. No, the losers are these disciples who choose to walk away from Christ. In my mind, and perhaps in yours, whenever all these folks are bailing out, we have a tendency to pity Christ, because we can imagine the heartbreak here as he sees the backsides of these people as they, in the distance, get smaller and smaller because they're leaving him. But really, the ones to be pitied here are the ones choosing to leave Christ. They're the ones who, maybe on this day, they had no regrets. I'm going to get back home. I'm not going to follow this guy. I'm going to go live my life. And they took, in some respects, the easy path home. And I don't know a lot about them. You don't know a lot about their details. We know probably all of them had a mom, had a dad, had a spouse, had children, had parents. They all probably had somebody that needed them to stick with Christ, to make a better decision. But one thing for sure we know is that they now are the ones to be pitied. They are the ones who ultimately, unless they came back to Jesus later, were the grandest of losers. On this day, maybe they did not have any regrets at all. But surely there's coming a day when they would regret quitting on Christ, the greatest of all mistakes. See, they would, for the short term, walk an easier path, but later this path would lead them to a horrible place, a place that they likely previously did not believe even existed until they enter the gates. It's not possible to do this, of course, but if we could dig those thousands up who left Christ and say, what would you tell us today? What would be your advice to us? Wouldn't they just scream at us, don't turn back. Don't leave Jesus. Don't experience the destiny which is now ours. Keep walking, keep loving, keep serving this man. We have regrets for all eternity because we allowed a hard saying to cause us to walk away. Verse 66 again. In the original, John 6, it says, after this, many disciples walked away. After this. May I ask you to think for a moment about that word, this? What is the this that causes disciples to walk away from Christ today? A little bit unpleasant, but we won't stay on this long. But can you think for just a moment about people that you may know in your life, in your circle of love and influence, who at one time were faithfully following Jesus, but a this occurred, or a series of thises that caused them to no longer follow after Christ? I'll share some information about some people I have known and loved. That at one time, their pews were always filled. If there was a job that needed doing in the Lord's church, theirs were the first hands up. They were vigilant, diligent, looking for opportunities to serve. They were hungering and thirsting after righteousness. One was a brilliant young man, a valedictorian. We were in high school together. The this that caused him to walk away from Christ was a college professor who encouraged my buddy to think for himself, to not dare believe that we actually were created beings with a purpose, but rather that we evolved ultimately from pond scum or something like that. Another part of the this that caused my buddy to stay in a fallen condition, the minister of that particular church never checked on him. Elders never checked on him. Members never really reached out to him. Now, it's still his decision, and he'll ultimately bear responsibility for that. But a lot of times when people stop walking after Christ, there are a variety of factors involved. And my buddy has never come back to the Lord's church because of that series of thises. Another person, a young lady, no reason to mention her name either, but essentially the problem with her that she shared with me in conversations was hypocrisy. She was in a small town and was contemplating, her life, her relationship with Christ, and she would worship with other Christians, and she would see them. This is my explanation for her words to me. She would see them come to church, and they'd put on their Sunday costumes, their Christian costumes, and she would see how they would pretend to be in the worship assembly and Bible classes, and then she would see them out in the world with their world wardrobe on and see how they really were. And if that's what Christianity was really like, she didn't want to be a part of that. And that was the this that caused her to no longer walk with Christ. And I was in this town not all that long ago, and I inquired about this young lady, and she's still away from Jesus. Another one. He was a Vietnam hero in some respects. Went over there and did great work for our country. And came home, was well received by the church, by family, by friends, worshiped for a while. His this was some of the things that began to come back in his mind that he saw in that war. Some of the horrible images that they crept in. And it caused him to think something different about people than what the Bible tells us to think about people. He also was doing business with some Christians in this particular community. And he saw that some of these Christians were willing to cut corners, cut ethical corners in order to make $1 or $2 or 10. And that just so disturbed him. And also, about that time, he found that he could make more money himself in his own business if he would start reaching out and forming other relationships and friendships with people outside the body of Christ. And he began to go more in that worldly direction, again, in order to make more money. And it was about that time that he was leaving Jesus that his 2 children were becoming teenagers. The time in their life when they most needed values, the time in their life when they most needed to be in Bible class and to be around godly people. It was about that time that Daddy decided, we're not going to go to church anymore. And those 2 children grew up without a spiritual foundation being emphasized, without a spiritual family to be a part of. And those 2 children, their lives just became, I won't go into detail, but became absolute nightmare. An absolute nightmare of drugs, of incarcerations, of suicide attempts. That there was a significant series of thises that led to that disaster. Another person and another this or two that she had. One of the thises that caused her to fall away from Christ was a really overbearing father. And he was such, at times, a tyrant He loved his daughter, but he was so unrelenting at times, just so unmerciful. And he was a leader in the church, and that didn't sit well with his daughter. How can you be a godly person and talk to me this way and deal with others so harshly? This particular young lady was being raised by a mother who seemingly never passed up an opportunity to bash a member of the Lord's church. Maybe you know people like that. It's just a hobby for them to criticize parts of the family of God. Well, this particular person I'm thinking of being raised up in that and hearing all that, it surely didn't encourage them to be involved in God's forever family. And today, this person is not continuing to follow Jesus. I have many friends in Ukraine. Some are continuing faithful to follow Jesus. Others are not. And this that has caused many or some of them to fall away is that at times, as you know, Christianity can be inconvenient. It can be difficult. Many of them came out of a religious system that said, if you want to follow Jesus, show up on Easter, show up maybe on Christmas, rest, pretty much you're on your own. Then we come with a new gospel with passages like Hebrews 10:25, not forsaking the assembly, and that's a challenge for some folks who have some shallow spiritual roots. And thinking of shallow spiritual roots, some other folks and some relatives of mine that what I've observed, not trying to be judgmental at all, but just trying to be accurate in what I've observed, is some of them at times did not have the deepest of spiritual roots. And then they went and married other people who had even more shallow spiritual roots. And when the winds blew, they just fell down. And they had these thises that caused them to walk away from Christ. And you all can probably think of the folks in your circles now who have maybe stopped or certainly close to the end of following Jesus. And we would think about what are the thises. At this they turn back. Maybe it was somebody gossiped about them. Maybe somebody was inattentive to a significant need that they had in their lives. Maybe it was a long sermon. Maybe it was a loud baby. Maybe it was a hard seat in a pew. Whatever it was this that caused them to walk away. And that is such a heartbreaking thing. And we need to make it our daily prayer and our daily mission to try to bring back to God, to bring back to His family those who had a this. And let's be sure that we don't become a this for another person that would discourage them, that would cause them to stop. We want to live the kind of life that causes people to be drawn more closely to Christ. We want to say the kind of words. We want to have the kind of attitude. We want to have the kind of visible deeds that everybody that sees us or hears us or that encounters us say, yes, that makes me want to be more like Jesus. That makes me want to worship more enthusiastically. That helps me to be a better person. Hard sayings. Hard sayings. When they encounter fragile people, sometimes the ending isn't so good. And there are a lot of hard sayings in our Bible. Deny yourself, take up your cross daily, Matthew 16:24. Serve one another, Matthew 23:11. On the first day of the week, let every one of you give, 1 Corinthians 16:1. Live peaceably with all men, Romans 12:18. Do not complain, 1 Corinthians 10:10. Mentioned earlier, Hebrews 10:25. Do not forsake the assembly. Again, lots of hard sayings, but we understand that when we obey the hard sayings, we're making for ourselves a much easier life, certainly in the hereafter. For example, when we deny ourselves, which that's a hard thing to do, but when we deny ourselves, we're actually denying the devil an opportunity to control our life and our destiny. We're losing our life here to gain a better life in the hereafter. And when we humble ourselves, which is a hard thing to do, we're actually making ourselves great in the eyes of God. And when we give, which sometimes is a hard thing to do, whenever we give, we receive so much more from God. Luke 6:38, He's going to outgive us every time. And when we make an effort to be at peace with all people, which at times, as you know, can be a hard thing to do, according to Matthew 5:9, we'll be called the children of God. And when we resist the urge to complain and complain and complain, we're making ourselves much more pleasant for those that we would seek to draw to Christ. And when we resist the urge to forsake the assembly, we're giving ourselves the gift of being in an assembly, being in a worship with the grandest of people, doing the grandest of things. So we embrace the hard sayings. We do what's challenging so that we can have an even better life here and ultimately, certainly, in the hereafter. If we neglect to do the hard sayings, then we should be bracing ourselves for a very hard day of judgment, followed by a very hard sentence, followed by an even harder eternity. We don't quit. We don't stop. We embrace the challenges of New Testament Christianity. Clark's got me, but I would encourage you to look at 2 Timothy chapter 2, 20 and following, and look at the downside of no longer walking with Jesus. You know, there's so many things we can do, right, to prevent falling away from Jesus. If we understand the overriding cause of falling away from Jesus, it gets back to the shallow roots. The hard sayings come and blow into us, and we got the shallow roots. Then we got an issue. What do deep roots do for a tree? Deep roots anchor that tree to the ground, and so when the winds blow, the tree can stand strong. Our deep spiritual roots anchor us to Jesus, and so when the winds blow and when the hard sayings come and Christian living sometimes get difficult, we're able to stand tall and persevere. But so how do we get stronger? How do we develop these deeper roots? We stick with the good book, right? We read this book. A page a day is going to keep the devil away. It's going to help us to be stronger. Find time for this. We also not only read the good book, but we hang out as best we can. We spend quality time with good people. Even Peter, as strong as he was, when he got away from good people, was around bad people, warming by the devil's fire, he became something that he should not have become. So we're with good people. But also, we practice. We practice being good. How do you get better at golf? Practice. How do you get better at volleyball? Practice. Tennis. Practice. Sewing. Practice. Your job. Practice. How do you get better at Christian living? Practice. Practice saying good things. Practice doing good things. Practice having good thoughts. Practice makes perfect. Let's practice this. Would you pray with me, please? Father, thank you that we get to be in an assembly